Welcome to my August Classics Wrap-Up. This is a video where I'm going to tell you about the 2 classics that I read in the month of August. I only read 2 this month, but I enjoyed them both, so quality over quantity. But I am about to start having really big classics wrap-ups again, most likely because I am going to be in school, and so I'm going to be reading several classics over the course of the next semester. But for now, let's just get into talking about the classics that I read this month. I read The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien and A Study in Scarlet by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. And since this is a classics wrap-up where I'm going to be going on in depth a little bit about the specifics of these books, I'm just going to give a spoiler warning here. I'm going to be spoiling both The Hobbit and the Sherlock Holmes story, at least elements of it. And so if you don't want to know anything, if you don't want to hear about specific plot points, then I would leave now and just wait for my spoiler-free thoughts that I will briefly say in my wrap-up, which is coming soon. Okay, and if you stayed, let's get started. So I'm gonna start by talking about The Hobbit, which is the classic that I read first this month. I gave this book 5 stars. I'm really glad I did read it right now because I was expecting to have to read it over the course of the school year at some point, but it turns out that I'm not going to be reading this book, and so I'm glad that I started this when I did. This, as I'm sure you know, is high fantasy. It's some of the first high fantasy, as we would call it today. Fantasy, you know, I'm in a class about the origins of fantasy right now, so there's tons of old origins of fantasy, and it's debated about what counts as like fantasy, but Tolkien pretty much created so much of modern fantasy that's pretty accepted by most fantasy readers and academics. People know how important Tolkien is. And so I thought it was just such a treat to be able to read The Hobbit and to get or reread The Hobbit. And I really enjoyed this one. I give it 5 stars. I loved it, which was shocking to me because when I was 14, I had to read this book for school, and I did not really like it then. I was mainly reading middle grade at the time, and I know this can be considered middle grade, but the language is just different than middle grade of today. I was mainly reading Rick Riordan or Harry Potter, and I had not read many classics. I had not really read any classics, honestly, and I hadn't read much really high epic fantasy. And so The Hobbit was a challenge for me, but I'm so glad that I gave it a second go. I've wanted to give this and Lord of the Rings a second go for a long time, and I just decided to recently. The first chapter was great. It was kind of nonsensical and a little bit like children's classics, and if you know my reading taste, you know I love children's classics. But I really enjoyed meeting Bilbo and getting to know the Shire. The Shire is such an interesting setting. I loved hearing about the dwarves, the hobbits and their way of life. And I loved meeting Gandalf because Gandalf is such an interesting character who has so much like sass and trickery to him that I knew Gandalf had, but I'm always surprised by it when I encounter Gandalf because I expect him to be, I don't know, a little more kindly, but he's not. He is kind at times, I guess, but I don't know if I would consider that one of his main traits other than just like tricky, intelligent, powerful, etc. Like there's other things that I would describe Gandalf as. Like he's more ambitious, he definitely has a goal in mind. He definitely like sees the best in Bilbo and believes in Bilbo, but he's not really here to be like a Dumbledore figure, you know? And I really enjoyed that. I thought it was a really interesting take on the old wizard, which is really funny to me because the old wizard is like such a trope, like the mentor wizard is such a trope. And I really like that the place where it may have come from, or one of the places at least, didn't really reduce that trope to what we think of as the trope now. The trope where it originated was much more complicated, and I love that that was the case. I was so interested in Gandalf and learning about his motivations, and I just would like to see more of him. I'm excited to see more of him in Lord of the Rings, and I know he's the only character that comes back in such a big way. Then the quest begins, and I thought that was really interesting. I really liked going through each task and meeting each creature. It reminded me a little bit of Percy Jackson, actually, and I'm sure that like this style of book has influenced the middle grade of today, and that's why it reminded me of Percy Jackson, but I'm just coming off of a Percy Jackson reread, and I really found myself enjoying the way that the quests worked in Percy Jackson, whereas that's a complaint from a lot of people, and I thought The Hobbit did the same thing, and I didn't mind it, just like I didn't mind it in Percy Jackson. I thought that it was fun and it fit the story and it was done well. There were lots of little parts to this quest that like you can split the quest up into several different episodes, I guess. My favorite of those episodes were the Gollum chapter, just because I know somewhat about Gollum, and I think that that chapter is definitely important for the larger story of Middle Earth. And so I really enjoyed seeing that, and I really liked seeing Gollum before the Gollum that I remember, which was the Gollum of the Lord of the Rings. But yeah, that was a really good chapter. And then I also really liked the one where all of the dwarves were traveling through the forest. Well, everyone was traveling through the forest, and then they would get to where the wood elves were having a feast, and then they would disappear, and then they'd be chasing them through the forest, and the wood elves capture them, and Bilbo has to save them. That was really good. Really enjoyed the magic of that scene and the setting of that scene. I love the settings of this book, like just in general. Like there's not a setting that I was unhappy with. I was just interested in all of it. Tolkien describes them so beautifully, but the setting of the woods where the wood elves are, I don't remember what it's called. Mirkwood? Yeah, Mirkwood. I really liked the forest Mirkwood, and I really liked the traveling through the forest, all the creatures that would just sort of roam the forest and called it their home. I loved how dark everything felt and how it really felt like the dwarves and the hobbits were outsiders. But one of the things that I loved about the forest was also that the elves were there, and their magic, and whenever the elves came in, they were just so beautiful and haunting, and their magic was the same way. And so I loved the chase through the forest. I loved when they would come into contact with elves and the singing. It was just, I loved it. I cannot wait to see more of the elves in Lord of the Rings, and so I'm super excited to continue with that. But yeah, like I said, I just loved the settings of this book, and I loved the way that Tolkien was able to describe it. That Tolkien has such an amazing writing style that was too hard for me when I read it the first time, but it's just right for me this time. Like I really, really enjoyed the way that he told this and the way he would word things and describe things so vividly. I could see everything, I could feel everything. It really transported me, and I think that's also why these books hold up so much, because of the really engaging writing. The ending, I didn't love every element of the ending. I liked the parts with Smaug, and I liked the parts with the company, like Bilbo and company, but I didn't love the battle going on around them. I thought the battle going around them, it shocked me. I was interested in it. I didn't realize this would happen. I completely forgot about it. But I also don't care about the goblins as villains as much, and so I wasn't super psyched to see them come back, but I was interested in everything that Tolkien set up about this world through that battle. That was really interesting, and that I think is really what was important. And I would like to see how this battle relates to the Lord of the Rings, how they think about it at the time, etc. In the end, I was shocked by how much I really liked this book. I really, really enjoyed it, and I would recommend it if you like high fantasy. The writing style can be a bit much at first, but if you read classics, then this, it's not like the hardest writing I've ever read as classics go, and so you might be fine. Okay, so on to Sherlock Holmes. I just read the first one in this bind-up of the first 3 Sherlock Holmes books. I read A Study in Scarlet, which is just this part of the book. The rest is books 2 and 3, and I really enjoyed A Study in Scarlet, and I was not expecting to with this one either. I was expecting to enjoy it, but I've never loved a detective story super much, like a classics detective story. Like I read some of Poe's works and I thought they were okay, but I wasn't expecting to really enjoy them. I really enjoyed this. Like I feel like when you think about detective stories that come before this, or maybe even after, I don't know, I haven't read many other than this one and Poe's, but Poe's are very like they're good, they're cute, they're they're whatever, and they definitely inspired Sherlock Holmes. But like Sherlock Holmes, I can see why this is the detective story, why this is the OG. This is the one everyone comes back to. This is the one that really has just lasted through times. We've seen retellings and movies and TV shows and everything. So much stuff based off of this story, and there's a lot there. I can tell that I can see why this has lasted so long, because there's so much content and it's so good. Like with Poe's stories, I often felt like the Purloined Letter and things, they were a bit short or a bit empty. They just weren't very fleshed out. A Study in Scarlet is very deeply fleshed out. We follow, for the first part, we follow Sherlock and Watson meeting and then living together, and then Watson kind of gets embroiled in Sherlock's work, where Sherlock is trying to figure out this murder and solve the case. And he's brought on by the detectives at Scotland Yard because they can't figure it out. And so Sherlock has to, you know, help them out. And then at the end of the first part, we figure out who did it, or Sherlock does. But it ends very quickly, very abruptly. But other than that, the first part I thought was very well done. This mystery had a lot of legs to it. We had a lot of plot. Whereas in my experience, detective stories before this had been mostly like someone who is unaware, kind of like a Watson figure, would be like, what is going on here? And then like the police wouldn't be able to figure it out. And then like this amazing detective would deduce like what happened, and then they would just tell you. They wouldn't show you what happened really. They would just tell you how they came to their conclusions, and there wouldn't be much plot. It was mainly like a conversation between two people. The Purloined Letter is especially like this. I know Poe's detective basically just tells his companion and the police how he figured something out. We never see him figure it out. We see Sherlock figure it out in this one. A good like 60 pages are dedicated to Sherlock figuring it out and luring the guy in and trying to like really get on their trail and failing and succeeding, and just it really fits a lot in those 60 pages. And then the next 60 pages seem very unrelated. I didn't know anything about A Study in Scarlet when I picked it up, other than I knew it had these two parts. I knew that there was a murder mystery, and I've actually seen Sherlock, so I've seen like A Study in Pink, which had elements that were the same as A Study in Scarlet, but they're really like nothing alike. Really beyond the characters and a few things, like the mystery is very different. But the second part of A Study in Scarlet is what really makes this different from any other detective story I've seen, A Study in Pink, whatever, like, because I had no idea what was going on. We went and we left England, where this whole thing has gone down, and we go into America, we go into Utah, and we follow this man and his this daughter that he adopts, teaming up with and becoming Mormons, and then having to eventually leave. And I had no idea how this was related. The whole time I was like, what is this? Is this just like is A Study in Scarlet two short stories just in one? Like, when is Sherlock gonna come in? What is the mystery Sherlock needs to figure out? I had no idea what was going on. Like, I didn't know how these two stories are connected. I knew that this story was like this, that there were two parts, but I wasn't sure about what the connection would be. And let me tell you, the connection made it worth it, because I was more into part one than I was part two, but the connection really made me realize what this author was trying to do with the part one and part two thing. And it was really different from a lot of detective stories that I've seen, like classic detective stories. This book was willing to show you everything. It was willing to show you the motivations and the minds of not only like Sherlock and Watson, but also the minds of other people in the story and the backstory of other people in the story and their history. And I thought that it was just done so well. My qualms with this book is that part two was pretty slow moving. I was less engrossed by part two than I was with part one. And I also don't like, I know from like what Mormons have said that the Mormon rep in this book is not good. Like, it's nothing like Mormons or people in the Church of Latter-day Saints. Like, it's nothing like that. And so, you know, that's not great. But otherwise, I thought that this was a really brilliantly woven together plot. I thought the characters had a lot more depth than what I've seen in other detective stories, like classic detective stories. I really felt like I knew Sherlock a little bit more, or I knew Watson really well. And then even with other characters who I don't want to like spoil or anything, when we see so much of them, you really get to understand them and understand why they do the things they do and why they feel the things they feel. In the end, I gave this like 4.5 stars, probably 4.5. I don't know. I really don't know this genre very well. And so I don't really know how to rate it completely accurately. And I don't know that detective fiction will ever be my favorite genre of classics or just genre of books in general, but I really enjoyed this one, and I'm really gonna enjoy going through the rest of the Sherlock Holmes series. I hope I'm gonna be continuing with this bind up at least, and I hope that I can see what this genre has to offer. I think that should do it for the classics wrap up this time. I only had 2 classics to talk about, and that went really quickly, but I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope that we can continue talking about these classics. Let me know if you've read A Study in Scarlet or The Hobbit down below in the comments, and we can talk. Tell me your thoughts, tell me if you agree with me or if you don't, and I will see you next time. Bye.